Good afternoon. This is Muslim Network TV with Dr. Al-Deen and Critical Talk. I was thinking, and I'm sure everybody has, been looking at all of the issues that are rising at the border. It's amazing to me that Biden hasn't been in office 100 days and they expect him to do more than Trump could do in 4 years, but that's another point. What I wanted to think about was, what do we mean by inhumane treatment? What do we mean by humane treatment? What is the problem with our immigration laws? Should they be changed? That's obvious. And the fact that we're one of the few countries that actually has them. But I also wanted to look at the other side of the question, and that is that many in America have issues, some vetted, some not, about immigration itself and what that does to indigenous marginalized community. Today, I have with me Anthony Simpkins, who is a favorite of ours on Critical Talk when it comes to things kind of quasi legal, political, and with housing, and just a good feedback person for me to talk about some of these issues. I think it's important to note that recently Anthony has changed jobs and he is now the president and CEO of one of the Chicago's largest housing non-for-profit corporation. We already know Anthony as a judge, and I should say Judge Simpkins and stop getting familiar. And we know that he had been the deputy commissioner of housing for the city of Chicago. So I would like to invite him forth.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. McLeod. It's nice to be with you again in your audience. It's always
Well,
a pleasure.
wait a minute. Before we do any of the good stuff, give me a paragraph about your new job.
Sure. So, Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago is the Chicago area's largest homeownership focused nonprofit organization. It is a community development financial institution, or CDFI, that does retail mortgage lending. So we actually lend to people who want to buy homes, people who want to renovate their home, people that want to refinance their home. We have a redevelopment corporation that actually develops housing. We have a HUD certified counseling agency as well that does homeownership education. Many times people have to go through a homeownership education process before they can qualify for certain mortgages. We have educational programs for financial literacy, estate planning, student loan management, stuff like that. And then we also do foreclosure counseling as well and help people who are in foreclosure trouble. During the foreclosure crisis, we did quite a bit of that. And then we also have a neighborhood strategies division, which does community programming. So, for instance, during the pandemic, we worked with a lot of community residents and community organizations to make sure that we were able to get food and PPE to people. We have neighborhood councils that address issues in neighborhoods. We focus on low and moderate income communities, primarily communities of color in Chicago and in the south suburbs of Chicago and the Southland. We've been around for about 45 years, started in 1975, and have lent over $675 million for people of color and low and moderate income people to buy their first homes or fix their homes. We have counseled over oh God, over 10,000 people, probably saved some 6,000 people from foreclosure. It's a great organization. I've actually worked with the organization in my other career capacities in the past, and an opportunity came. They were looking for new leadership, and I was more than excited to come and work with this fantastic organization.
Wow, I didn't know you all did all of that. So I'm gonna stop yelling at you about multitasking, um, because I can't even keep all of that in my head. But today, I was watching some stuff and they had these kids laying out on what looked like the sidewalk to me in these aluminum kind of blankets. I never, until this immigration stuff, I had never seen an aluminum blanket, but well, an aluminum looking blanket. Um, when we think about immigration, we know our immigration laws suck. But when we look worldwide, many countries do not have immigration policies. The Muslim world has none. You can come in and be a resident, and they'll harass you and surveil you to pieces, but you can't immigrate and become a citizen. But in the West, the US, Canada, most of Europe, you can actually qualify to become a citizen through a set of either loose or very tight immigration policies. What is the problem with ours, beside the fact that it takes 10 years to become a citizen?
Um, well, U.S. immigration policy and U.S. immigration laws, you have to understand them, of course, from the context that the United States really is a country of immigrants, right?
Me.
The United States itself proper, right, was essentially a colonial enterprise. Colonial enterprises, immigration from the mother country, if you will, is very important if you're then trying to establish that as a permanent part of the empire. In this case, it actually became its own state and separated from the original empire. And so the policy of the United States has always been to welcome immigrants. Immigration policy in the United States, however, has also always been very political. So it's not just a bureaucratic enterprise. The policy was written to encourage immigration by some and discourage immigration by
But,
others.
mhm.
I mean, recently, because of some of the tragic incidents that have happened recently, the Chinese exclusion laws and some other stuff has been mentioned in the news quite a bit lately. So immigration laws have always sort of reflected the political and social imperatives of the time. Of course, the biggest sea change in immigration laws was ushered in along with the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which opened up immigration widely, and in fact, um, ushered in access to many Muslims to America from around the world, who
Well,
then.
interestingly, and I guess what should have been, um, I'm thinking I just got through watching Perry Mason, so I'm really on to the questions. You got to ask the prior question because you don't have evidence for the next question and all this stuff. But anyway, is America, quotation marks around that, was hoping that Europeans would immigrate here.
Mhm.
Europeans are not beating down the door to come to the United States for a variety of reasons. Poor healthcare, complex and inefficient, lots of things that go for the social contract. So everybody else is trying to come here. But I guess the real question is why? Why would you want to come to a place that is, I mean, tied up in this racial quagmire? that there's a killing on the street. I mean, we're trying to catch up with Colombia with killings on the street and random kidnappings and all kinds of stuff. Why would you want to come here?
Well, that's interesting, and essentially because what you'll find is that people that immigrate to America are immigrating here for opportunity. What does that mean? That means that many of them, and especially now, immigration is in the public discourse now because of what's happening for primarily at the southern border between the United States and Mexico, and that's a crisis situation, right? In my mind, it's not much different than what you'd see you know, in Myanmar or in Syria, where you have a crisis situation at home, and then people feel compelled to leave their home country and migrate somewhere else in a crisis situation. And what you
But is
have,
are you saying that that's normal? Because we had a crisis situation here where there were hanging numbers of black men all over this country out in the public with parties. It didn't encourage us to immigrate anywhere.
well, I mean, for a good period of that time, we weren't able to immigrate. Many black people did. I mean, that's why there's a
Yeah,
sizable African American population in Canada, for instance. Some
right,
of us did, in fact, migrate to Mexico, and there's a long history of African American lineage in Mexico. So some of us did. There's the history of the folks that migrated to Liberia. So there
right,
has been some out migration by African Americans, but for the most part, we were here in a situation where we couldn't migrate,
right,
and at that point, we had become sort of an essential. What we chose to do, for the most part, I think, as a people, was fight for our space in the society, as
right,
opposed to flee the society. But what you have at the southern border is people that are fleeing, and most of these immigrants are not coming from Mexico; they're coming through Mexico, but they're fleeing situations where the economies are crashing, where the country is rife with drug gangs and violence, and I mean, they're sort of making a natural human decision that this is not safe or productive for my family. I got to go someplace else. People have been migrating around the world for centuries. What this is sort of like a sudden crisis, right? We saw it during the Bush administration. We saw it during the Obama administration, right? These
right.
spikes of immigration. And ultimately, there's plenty that needs to be done with immigration policy here in the United States. But ultimately, the real problem lies in the home countries, right? Who have political and economic and social conditions that compel their people to leave.
Yeah, but some of the people causing the problem are migrating with the people who would be their victims. So you have, and I'm not saying it's a significant number. I actually don't know, but I am sure that it is also a way for some of the criminals to get in. We don't, and you can correct me, we don't have the necessary uh, judges, lawyers, whoever it is that vets people uh, to make sure that you are who you say you are, even.
Well, I mean, I suppose in theory, our immigration system is supposed to sort of ferret out criminals and others. Um, no system like that works perfectly. I'm sure there are any number of criminal element that have come through a completely legal immigration process. However, when you have thousands of people that are trying to cross the border, um, I would imagine the vast majority of them are crossing the border out of necessity because of their economic and social and conditions. But sure, I mean, with that number of people, I'm sure you're going to have some criminal element that's coming along with them. That's going to be in just about any population. You may remember the same claims were made during the Haitian boat lifts when they were denying entry to Haitians, but were allowing just about any Cuban that wanted to, literally any Cuban that wanted to come to the United States and have refugee status and asylum. And the claim they made were that, oh, well, the Haitians, these are all criminals. They were people that were fleeing literally the poorest country in the hemisphere at the time. Um, so again, I mean, a lot of the issues surrounding immigration are really a reflection of the social and political issues of the particular time at which we're talking about.
Okay, this is Dr. Al-Deen. I'm here with Judge Anthony Simpkins, who is heading up a massive mammoth of an organization, something about housing, because it's got too many arms there to just say housing. And we're talking about immigration. We'll be right back on Muslim Network TV.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an
Our neighbors don't
eye-catching
realize
message.
that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward. That lesson learned have brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
This is Dr. Al-Deen, and I'm here with Judge Anthony Simpkins. And we're talking about immigration on one hand, and then on the other hand, we're going to talk about the American response. But back to what you're fleeing. You and I have traveled the world, and we see conditions which even the worst condition in America doesn't quite measure up to. Um, but wouldn't it be better if those people stood their ground?
Um,
Or can they?
well, I mean, I think that's really the underlying issue. I mean, ultimately, yes, right? What would we prefer? We would prefer countries, we would prefer societies that are responsive to the needs of their people, and so that they don't have these massive outflows of their populations seeking to live someplace else. But as we've seen in places like Syria and Egypt, that's not always feasible for populations to make those kinds of changes to their governments, or China, or there are plenty of other examples of that, or the Uyghurs, for instance, right? They don't make up a significant enough of the population to make the kinds of changes that need to be made to protect themselves and their families, and so they see no alternative but to go somewhere else.
Yeah, we only let in a dozen every
Yeah.
now and then.
Yeah.
So, but when you see these long lines of people, and they have learned not to travel in the long lines because the predators will prey on them in the long lines with their children and a few things on their back. One of the things someone said to me recently, think about this: pack everything that you really want to have in your suitcase. Can't come back and get anything else. What are you going to put in there?
Right. Well,
And
imagine the people that are sending children by themselves. I mean,
that's
can
us.
you imagine that?
No, and but I'm understanding they're saying if I don't have a chance and I must die, let me give you the best possibility to live.
Hmm.
And here are kids, I mean, knowing nothing, out on a road trying to get to somewhere they don't know what that is either.
I mean, it's an amazing, it's just an unfathomable position to put a child in. So imagine the desperation of a parent,
Yeah,
right? Who says it's better for me to risk my child traveling hundreds of miles to some place they've never been to and know nothing about, maybe don't speak the language at all, by themselves. Where we live is so horrible and dangerous for them. I'd rather they do that. So, I mean, to a certain extent, you can't get around the fact that you have to have reasonable immigration policy, right? You can't just have a completely open border, so you don't know who's coming in and out of your country, et cetera, especially nowadays, right? With both internal and external crime and terrorism and all kinds of other stuff and
right,
human trafficking and everything. You have to have some controls. That absolutely makes sense. And that's, to a certain extent, the decisions of what those controls are political decisions. But I think we cannot separate ourselves from or forget the fact that immigration, to a great extent, is also a humanitarian issue,
right, right,
and so there have to be sort of practical decisions made about um, how you control entry and exit to your borders. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind that just as human beings, we have some obligation to try and help people address uh, true humanitarian issues, right?
well, yeah, yeah. On one side of me says, yeah, 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 yeah. The other side of me says, it's more than people, a nation as a sovereign place also has an army. It also has a language. It also has, oh, I don't know, ways of doing things. When you let so many people in that the national language changes, you can't have a standing army because people don't speak English well enough and don't have whatever that glue is, um, that would make you want to serve in the armed forces. So, I mean, you might be compelled to go back to conscription or something. But how do you have a sovereign state with a bunch of people really unconnected to the state?
Well, that's interesting. I think you are more likely to produce a an integration or assimilation process when people don't have to exist in the shadows, right? That's really where you find them sort of disconnected from the larger society just out of necessity because they have to stay hidden. If you have a process where people can come in and be sort of fully authorized and fully integrated into the society, I mean, America is not in danger of losing English as its primary language or any of that kind of stuff. Is 400,000 Americans here, a few 100,000 additional immigrants every year. It's not going to change anything. And believe me, immigrants from South America and Mexico are not the only immigrants that come to the United States. There's an interesting fact when during the Bush administration, I believe, when immigration was a huge issue, and they were talking about this estimated 11 million people that were in the United States, immigrants illegally. A huge portion of that 11 million were people that had come to the United States illegally,
Mhm.
but just remained after their visas expired.
Right.
And what's interesting is, and I think I heard Dick Durbin say this in a speech one time, a significant portion of those visa overstays were people from Ireland.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of media attention to immigrants that look a certain way. People from Mexico and South America, people from Muslim countries. These are sort of the immigrants that they focus on, but they do not make up all of the immigrants, nor do they form the basis of all of the immigration problems that the United States has.
So what you're saying is that we've got more than just people coming across the southern border. We got overstays of visas, and then it's overstay your visa, but where you're from, as is going to determine how much I surveil you and get you on up out of here. And although the Irish kind of speak English, I don't know what you call what their version of English is, but I mean, I go down one of the major streets here in Chicago, and I can land in a neighborhood where there is nothing in English.
Hmm.
Nothing.
Sure.
You know, uh, the folks get comfortable when they can settle with folk like themselves, and the language is understood, and the habits and this, that, and these celebrations and things are understood. So, what's going to make them become American?
Well, who's to say that they're not American already? America really has a proud history of these kinds of ethnic enclaves. And when the people are incredibly poor, they're ethnic ghettos, right? But the Jews and the Germans and the Irish and,
Mm,
and everybody else. And to a certain extent, that it often, especially in, large urban centers, that adds flavor, right? Everybody wants to go to Chinatown or Little Italy, or right. So there's a certain amount of ethnic flavor, ethnic pride. I mean, the real issue is most people object to. Most people have problems with immigration. It seems to me for one or two reasons. No, illegal immigration, just because I think you're right that people have the perspective that there's a much higher risk that a criminal element is going to come in because they're not coming in through the proper channels. And then number two, that it's just sort of unfair to those people who have followed the rules, right? To let all these people in who just have not followed the rules and stood in line with everybody else. But often what you hear, the main complaint is that illegal immigrants represent, or even legal immigrants for that matter, represent competition for jobs
yeah.
in the U.S. economy. And I think most economists will tell you, especially on the higher end, HB visas and stuff like that, those usually represent people with skills for which there is a constraint in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
There's just not enough people that can fill those skilled positions. And so they look for people from other places because there's just not enough people in the United States that they can find to fill those positions. On the lower levels, they will often say, well, these are jobs that, when you talk about, migrant farm workers and stuff like that, this is jobs that most Americans wouldn't be competing for in the first place.
Right.
But I mean, at the end of the day, especially at the lower rungs, and when you're talking about illegal immigration, you're talking about people primarily at the lower rungs of the economic ladder. America has more than enough resources, really, to absorb all of the immigrants at the border, provide them the resources that they need to become productive, tax-paying citizens at the end of the day, and to weed out the criminal element that we need to get rid of. But so much of the resources in the United States now are being coalesced in a few hands. The gap between the very rich and the very poor is growing and growing and growing in the United States. We have a wealth gap in the United States that's worse than some second and third world countries.
Yeah.
And the concern about the scarcity of resources really is not an artifact of immigration. It's an artifact of the concentration of wealth in this country. This country has incredible wealth. We probably have more billionaires that live in the United States than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
So we have more than enough resources to have a immigration policy that works, to weed out criminal element, and to absorb probably almost everybody that wants to come to this country, give them the resources they need to get up on their feet and be productive citizens who contribute to our society and to our economy. But the resources necessary to do that are just concentrated in very few hands.
Very few hands. We're going to take another quick break, and I want to come back and talk about um, having the resources to give everybody a leg up and African Americans. This is Dr. Al-Deen. I'm talking with Judge Anthony Simpkins, and we're talking about immigration and both sides of the issue. This is Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk. We'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. 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 And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is very smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
This is Dr. Al-Deen, and I'm talking with Judge Anthony Simpkins, and we're talking about all of the issues surrounding immigration. This is Muslim Network TV, and this is Critical Talk. I want to sound like that dude that comes on the BBC, and this is Hard Talk. But anyway, true. More billionaires than any other single country. We also have unfarmed land, but the immigrants are not going to unfarmed land. They are coming into cities. They are in some places, along with those that already live there, causing just a little bit of overcrowding and some tenuous situations if you're trying to escape violence and drug use and this and that and the other. But the thing that concerns me, what I hear from the African American communities, well, everybody always says we wouldn't do the jobs, but nobody's giving us an opportunity to do the jobs. Everybody's looking for opportunity, but where's the opportunity for me? I haven't been anywhere else. I don't see that there are enough resources to help me get up and do something. There are enough resources to keep me at a status quo.
Well, that's interesting. You know, and Dr. McLeod, you and I talked about this before. Being someone who has, for a good part of his career, worked on programs to bring resources to low and moderate income communities and low and moderate income families, especially on the social service side, but to a certain extent on the housing side too. What you often find is that the programs that have been created to assist people often actually sort of lock them in a box of poverty. And what do I mean by that?
Yeah.
I mean that, say, for instance, if you get a food stamps or you get income supplement payments because you're very, 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 very poor, or you get housing assistance, you get like a Section 8 voucher or something like that, right? Because they're for people that are economically very, very struggling. If I were to get a housing voucher, and so now that means I have a decent place to live, and then I do what everyone in society wants me to do is I go get an education.
Cost money.
I find myself a job, right?
Mhm.
And now I'm making a little bit of money. The minute I'm making $1 over the threshold for that housing voucher, I then lose that subsidy. So what does that mean? That means that the minute I make one economic and social step forward, um, I'm set back again, right?
Yeah.
Because now I lose the housing voucher, and the amount of money that I'm making is still not enough to pay market rate at $1,500 to $1,700 a month for
Mhm.
an apartment in a major city like the United States. So often, what we do is we sort of, in an effort to help people, we sort of lock them in cycles of poverty. Um, what would make more sense is maybe to provide incremental assistance as people's incremental economic situations improve, so that they can continue to have a little assistance until they really are at a place where they can continue their upward trajectory. So what
Say
does that
a little
mean?
bit more about that. Well,
Sure.
I mean, what would that look like?
What would that look like?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Say, for instance, if you had housing assistance that was like a tiered housing assistance. So right now, in most affordable housing projects, for instance, the affordable housing project is available for people who make no more than a specified amount of household income, right?
Okay.
Once you hit that threshold, you no longer qualify for that housing, right? Um,
Well, we could
enrolling.
raise the threshold.
Well, or how about what you do is you incrementalize the threshold, right?
Oh, okay.
So, for every certain amount of money over that threshold that you make, maybe your rent goes up a little bit more, right? But not enough to eat up the entire benefit that you've just
I got
received
it.
from
I
your
got
hard work,
it.
right? So
Yeah.
that gives you a chance, right, to realize some economic benefit, right? Maybe now you can go buy some more classes to get some more certificates, and so now you can get an even better job. And at some point, you success yourself out of the need of the assistance, but the assistance allows you to gradually grow in your success before you're cut off from the assistance. So what is that? Why is that significant to the conversation that we're having? That's significant to the conversation that we're having because if you have significant portions of the population, including many African Americans, who are locked in cycles of poverty and dependency, and you get an influx of low wage workers through immigration, they absolutely then it's very easy for those immigrants then to look like competition to them, or people will say to them, "That's your competition, right? That's your
Mm.
enemy, right?"
Mm.
When I'm suggesting that really the enemy is those that in fact have the economic resources, who set up these systems that keep people in boxes and
That's
keep
the
them
enemy.
right? Instead of setting up a system that allows everybody to sort of have an opportunity to better their circumstances and move up. And so what you see is you don't see competition, you see the next cohort coming behind you because you're steady moving up. So it's a different dynamic. But again, that's part of sort of the political dynamic, the very, very wealthy and powerful in not just America, but in probably any society. Uh, it's often important to make sure that those in the lower echelons of the society and those in the middle are pitted against each other,
Yeah.
because that keeps them fighting themselves as if they were enemies, right?
Mm.
Nobody that came over the border from South America ever foreclosed on anybody's house here, right? There's no Muslim immigrant from some Muslim country overseas that moved anybody's factory out of the United States someplace else where they didn't have to pay the same wages, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
These folks are not your enemy, right? To the extent that your concerns are economic concerns, they're not your enemy. They're struggling just like you are. Your real enemy is where all of the money and resources coalesce in the people who do foreclose on your home, and the people who do cut your health care, and the people that do move your factory overseas, right? That's really where your economic enemy is. It's not the immigrant.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of that sounds like what Fidel Castro and Che Guevara were saying to people all across South America. You know, focus somewhere else. No, Chile is not the enemy of Honduras, not the enemy of Brazil, not the enemy of this, that, and the other. And I'm wondering, one of the things you have spoken about in other venues has been what makes some of those other immigrants successful and African Americans who have been here unsuccessful. And you talked about the idea of the collective versus the individual.
So, well, that's interesting. So, the difference between sort of indigenous African Americans and immigrants that come to the country, right, is their origins, right?
Right.
African Americans have been here voluntarily or involuntarily since the founding of the country. So we have been raised in the American cultural context. A specific context to us because it was often a context of violence and oppression and exploitation, but it was still an American context. While immigrants came from a different cultural and historic context and then came here. And so one of the particulars of Western culture generally, but American culture specifically, is this concept of individualism, right?
That one individual.
The individual maverick who makes his own destiny. And the rights that we have in the Constitution are very specific to individual rights, the right to free speech and the right to assembly and the right to bear arms. And everybody talks about their individual rights and their individual freedoms. And what do you see? I mean, the American cultural context is very much a context of a nuclear family who raises children, and those children then move, establish their own families, raise children, and those children move. Right? Where in other cultural contexts, multi-generational households are commonplace, right? They are the cultural norm. And as a result of that,
wealth faster.
As a result of that, what you often have is you also then have family and communal economics, right? So whereas African Americans often within the American sort of individualistic paradigm are often struggling in oppressive situations to try and make an economic foundation for themselves by themselves. Often you will find in many of our immigrant communities, there's much more of sort of a cultural context of communal support and communal investment. And so often I think that what we find is that they're often able to sort of make lemonade out of lemons, coming here with very little. Because they just have a different economic approach to it. They have a much more communal approach where friends and family and extended family will get together to support the progress of one. And then they move on to the next. And the one that's made it is able to contribute to that effort even more.
Right, exactly.
And just a little different from our very individualistic American context. Not to say that there aren't many strong African-American countries who provide each other mutual support. There aren't communities that are really African-American communities that aren't, integrated and have thrived. And often when our communities have thrived, people have come along and burned them to the ground. So, I mean, we have been a resilient people throughout the history of the United States, but I think that to a certain extent, considering the unique sort of oppressive situation that we've been in, we may have drank a little too much of the individualistic American Kool-Aid, when considering this particular circumstance in America that are particular to us. A much more communal approach was probably an approach that would have maybe protected us as a community more.
So it's not that we don't have a humanitarian streak, because we've always had that most of the time to our detriment. But how do we get at least African Americans? Well, we've seen it in pieces, with the now Asians are immigrants. They were just running around here for a minute. I mean, before they were immigrants, and then that kind of calmed down, but with those shootings in Atlanta, now they're immigrants again, and they've had to come out in force to head off what they anticipate is being lumped with the immigration issues south of the border, on one hand, because they had this myth of being the model everything citizen, wage earner, intellectual, whatever. So they've got to balance that. How and then we have another instance where there was a shooting yesterday in Boulder, Colorado. So, and that person was a Syrian American, right? So now there's going to be all this backlash against, I don't know if anybody could tell a Syrian from anybody else, but Muslims in general because of Trump's former ban. How do we have a voice that gets us closer to seeing what is really controlling us, so that we can have a conversation with those other constituent pockets of folks?
Well, and I think you really put your finger on it, Dr. McLeod. And it's really about building coalitions. The old the old poem about they came for the Unionists and I said nothing, and then they came for whatever, and I said, and by the time they came for me, there was nobody to speak up for me, right? So that's really what it's about. What you often find is that you have distinct populations that actually share some common social and economic issues,
Right.
But find themselves in their own silos. And so while African Americans are talking about police violence, Asian Americans are silent, or while Asian Americans are talking about the violence and discrimination they face, African Americans are silent because they worried about their thing over here. And Muslim Americans are talking about Islamophobia, and what the American experiment does show is that there is strength and there is success in numbers, right?
Yes.
You coalesce with those who share your common struggles. Does that mean that you are going to have a common worldview, a common perspective, common interests on everything? No. But it does mean that you can come together on common issues. And so, African Americans, Muslims, Asians, Hispanics, and Latinos should be together supporting each other in a common struggle for civil and human rights in the United States. And that's really how you are successful.
Yeah, that's true, because the only person getting away and smiling is the man at the top. Pitting everybody against each other and sitting back is like watching reality TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't have to agree on all things, but
Exactly.
you can agree on those things that are common struggles for your groups.
And may make a difference.
Yes.
This is Dr. Al-Deen. I've had a wonderful short hour with Judge Anthony Simpkins on immigration and all of the things that are feeding the conversations that we have about it. This is Muslim Network TV, and this has been Critical Talk. And hopefully, we will see you tomorrow.
I like